Good morning. I hope everyone got their coffee and your squiggles. I'm Melody Hensley. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Inquiry DC. We're so happy to have you here today. And I want to give you a few thank yous to, number one, to Simon Davis, our volunteer and event coordinator who did a lot of the legwork to put this event together today. Also, our CFI education team, Director John Shook and his assistant Ed Beck. And of course, I'd like to thank all of the prestigious speakers that will be here with us today. So thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to John. I'm going to turn it over to Ronald Lindsay, our CEO and President. Big round of applause for him.
Thank you so much for being here this morning. For a while, I didn't think I was going to make it myself, but I am here more or less on time, Washington time. Yeah, I'm on time. At any rate, I am the President and CEO of the Center for Inquiry. Welcome to our conference today on religious politics and secular values. I'm very excited about the speakers we're having today, not just because I'm on the speaker list, but no, we have great people here, and it is my great pleasure to introduce one of my colleagues, Dr. John Shook. John is, of course, the Director of Education for CFI. He's also a Research Associate Professor at State University of New York at Buffalo. As many of you know, he's the author of many books, including most recently The God Debates, which happens to be up here on the podium. It's a great book. One thing I actually found out about John fairly recently, I'm not sure he wants this publicized, but I'll do it anyway. He was actually an Eagle Scout. Is that correct? Yeah, Eagle Scout, right. So what better person to lead us through the thicket of religious politics than John Shook? Here he is.
Well, thank you very much, Ron, and thank you for coming out this morning to discuss an urgent problem, not just here in America, but around the world. Before I get started, let me also extend my thanks to the very same folks. We couldn't do it without Melody and Simon, of course, and Ed Beck, my assistant. We're very grateful for making these sorts of events possible. They're proving to be enormously successful, and we'll be doing lots more of them. As Ron said, I've got a book. I brought a couple of extra copies if you haven't gotten yours yet. Usually a talk is a shameless advertisement for some book. This talk actually is an exception because I haven't published this book yet, but this is in preparation for what might be my next book, trying to talk about varieties of secularism. I'm particularly interested in fine-tuning, if you will, perhaps even using some intelligent design for getting our message out as secularists. What exactly is it what we want? What do we view as the most urgent problems facing America? And what should be the best strategies for dealing with these most urgent problems? The good news is secularism is now getting a great deal of attention. The volume has been turned up, not only because of the successful undertakings of the various secular organizations, such as the Center for Inquiry, but also, of course, the new atheism has also been added to the cultural megaphone. Secularists are now very loud, very proud, and people are starting to notice what we're saying. That's the good news. The bad news is we're not always clear what we're saying. So we're being paid very close attention to now. We might have to modulate exactly what it is that we think we want, if there is one thing that we want. And there may not be a clear single thing that we want as secularists. We may have a hard time making up our minds about priorities. And that's okay, but we should at least be aware that that's what's going on. And we also need to be aware that we might be sending mixed messages to religious communities, not only here in America, but around the world. I'm the lead-off speaker for reasons still mysterious to me, but I thought, okay, what we ought to do is at least have in mind a couple of definitions. This should look familiar. What is the secular? Traditional definitions, right out of the Oxford English Dictionary. Of or belonging to the present or visible world, as distinguished from, well, the things that religion is concerned with, the eternal or spiritual world. Secularization refers to a social process. What are social structures and institutions doing over time? And if there is secularization on the rise, more and more institutions are becoming more and more secular-oriented, that is to say, devoted exclusively to secular purposes, things having to do with this world, human happiness, human values. Modern secularism after World War II was powerfully shaped by this book, which I recommend highly, the Munby's book in 1963, The Idea of a Secular Society. He outlines a few things that pretty much secularists have been saying ever since. For example, secularism refuses to commit itself as a whole to any one view of the nature of the whole universe and the role of human beings in it. Of course, science is our guide, but science constantly changes. What we want to do is avoid any dogmatic attitude about all of reality or the meaning of it all. Tends to be pluralistic, precisely because we're not searching for dogma or a way to impose that on everybody. It encourages democracy. It encourages public deliberation. It tends to try to use rational processes where possible. I would never confuse politics with a rational process, but nevertheless, there might be some methods that are better than others. Furthermore, a secular society doesn't have any, quote, official images, meaning there's nothing that everybody sort of has to bow down to, and the government does not participate in trying to impose one view of reality on everybody. Now, there are 5 general varieties of secularism that can be distinguished by sociologists. Structural secularism specifically just sort of refers to what's going on with the society's core institutions. Structural secularism says that secularization should continue until most or even all major sociocultural institutions are completely independent from religious control and religious orientation. Political secularism is a specific kind of structural secularism focusing in on the role of government. Government and religion are mostly separate. Government neither obeys nor endorses religion. There is a possibility that it may indirectly aid religion, and we're going to get into varieties of political secularism in a couple of slides. State secularism is a stronger form of political secularism. Not only is government completely separate from religion, but the state actually uses law to positively discourage religious belief and practice. There have been few countries that have actually gone so far. Their names might occur to you. We'll take a look at that in a minute. Ethical secularism is another kind of structural secularism which asks, where are people getting their morality from? In ethical secularism, ethical principles guiding society's welfare ought to be free from religious control or orientation. That is to say, exclusively concerned with earthly matters for earthly ends. Atheist secularism might be viewed as sort of the strongest possible logical endpoint. If you took all of these things out to their furthest possible degree, all political and social institutions should actively contradict, disparage, and discourage all forms of religious belief and practice. Atheist secularism is openly advocated by some atheists out there. I don't know if it's quite a majority view yet, but nevertheless, the topic of atheist secularism is more and more on the lips, not even so much of atheists, but it's very much on the minds of religious people, because they're wondering, where is this all going? And they're imagining, rightly or wrongly, that it's headed towards atheist secularism, and they don't like it. Okay. Again, structural secularism just simply says the number of political and social institutions that religious control ought to decrease over time, perhaps in the long run to a vanishing point. Religious organizations should devolve into just voluntary social associations, having no greater significance than, I don't know, the Elk Society or the Moose Club or, something like that. Political secularism is a high goal, and it ought to be achieved. There's various ways of doing it, though. There's not one simple thing as political secularism, although there is a family resemblance among all of them. They're mostly separate. It doesn't obey or endorse, but it may give religions funding and special privileges. Now, you might say, well, that doesn't sound familiar. We don't want that in the United States. But the United States is not the only kind of political secularism out there, as we're going to see in a minute. It's one of the primary paradigms, or archetypes, perhaps, but it's hardly the only one. Government does impose impartial justice on everyone. You don't get a special kind of justice or law because you're religious or non-religious. But on the other hand, it does not inhibit personal religious belief and practice. That should sound familiar. That was enshrined by our founders in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. However, state neutrality is hard to balance, as of course the Supreme Court has endlessly discovered. For example, should we let some religion into institutions for equal exercise? Because if we do want religious people to feel free to exercise their religion, they may have to do that in public context as well as private. Or should we deny all religious expression in public to ensure no establishment? Right? The No Establishment Clause worries about government entanglement and promotion of religion. And so the Supreme Court has bounced around trying to balance. And you can argue with how they've tried to find the balance. Certainly we could. But nevertheless, that is a very difficult job, and we should appreciate that it's an exceedingly difficult job for the Supreme Court to try to do under the best of circumstances. State secularism, of course, goes farther. And we should ask, is moving towards state secularism the main point of public advocacy of atheism? I don't know the answer to that. I hear a lot of discordant voices, some sounding pretty sure that that's the goal, others hesitant. We can talk about that. If it is, however, does that mean that atheism advocacy is not content just with resting with political secularism, but wants to move towards a stronger sort of state secularism? Now, atheists may not be asking themselves that question very much so far. Religious people are asking exactly that question, and they're asking us. What is your intent here? Is your intent just enforcing the First Amendment of the Constitution, or are you interested in greater use of state power to actively discourage and inhibit religious practice? What's going on? What is your long-run goal? Religions have been around for a long, long time. They're in the habit of thinking in the long run. They're not interested in what we want now or 10 years from now. They're interested in trends, and they've seen uprisings of heresies and disbelief before. They usually know how to deal with them, and they're considering right now what strategies to use against us. We'll be talking about that in a minute. Again, atheist secularism is sort of the long-run endpoint, a possible one. I'm not here to either recommend it or discourage it. I'm just saying it's very clearly on religious people's minds now, in a way that it perhaps wasn't 1 or 2 generations ago. Now, I'm going to focus on contrasting 3 political secularisms. One should be familiar, the United States there in the middle. I select out, almost arbitrarily, but for some good reason, India and France as contrast points. I could have picked Brazil or Turkey. Turkey is a fascinating variety of political secularism. But to keep it sort of simple and easy to diagram, we're going to just focus on these 3, and it'll help me reach my end point in another 10 minutes. Now, there's the United States in the middle, and it should look familiar. The Constitution is designed to promote, so far as possible, personal liberty. And there are many ways in which the government of the United States is designed to promote that in various sorts of ways. It's one of the priorities of political life. Cultural equality wasn't so much of a priority. The state is rather neutral in this country towards how far and how much cultures can maintain their distinctiveness, transmit their inheritance, and traditional practices on to the next generation. The state pretty much is neutral towards it, neither inhibits it nor particularly does anything to help it. Social fraternity is definitely not a priority. The government of the United States has never made it a major priority to encourage all of the citizens of the United States to have primary allegiance. However, we just sort of take it automatic that citizen allegiance should primarily go to the country. And it's fascinating in America how this has gradually happened almost without any effort at all. Even as recently as perhaps our great-grandparents, if you ask them, really who they are as their identity, they might identify their religion as their primary identity, or their cultural inheritance if they're recent immigrants, or the state that they were from. The United States might have not been the first thing to pop in their mind. Before the Civil War, people primarily identified with their own state. They didn't really regard themselves as citizens of the United States. They regarded themselves as a Virginian or, a Pennsylvanian and so forth. So it sort of gradually and almost haphazardly happened that way. But we still do expect citizen allegiance to go primarily to the country without much state promotion. Contrast this with France. France is not a country with a constitution really designed to promote individual liberty the same way the United States is. It's not so much interested in cultural equality, but it is intensely interested in social fraternity. After all, it was back in France, right? Vive la Révolution, right? Liberty, equality, fraternity, right? The 3 mottos of the French Revolution and much of European Enlightenment. They really want social fraternity. It's big a priority. They want citizen allegiance to go primarily to the country, indeed exclusively to the country. It's a stronger form. Think about how the French zealously guard their language, right? They're not content with everybody speaking just, whatever French they feel like. The dictionary is actually controlled by the French government, right? So they're pretty interested in maintaining a high degree of French cohesiveness. Now, how does this play out with respect to religion? What you need to realize up front is these three different varieties of political secularism each have a different preferred image of religion that they think that they're dealing with. Despite the facts on the ground, they nevertheless erect a government that they think is appropriate given what they take religion to be. And what religion is taken to be can vary enormously from country to country. Take, for example, in India, which displays a sort of equality secularism, it's intensely interested in promoting cultural equality. Multiculturalism is very strong in India. It's a very powerful political and religious force. How does the government treat religion? In India, it's perfectly constitutional under their secular constitution for government to support religious institutions, and they do so. Lots and lots of money go to the maintenance of primarily Hinduism, but also to Islam. The preferred image of religion is very favorable in India. In India, they have a very positive view of how religion contributes in very important ways to all of culture and society. Their preferred image of religion is that religion is about supplying a complete culture. That is to say, one has a very powerful cultural religious identity. It's your personal identity. It's how you're supposed to live your life. You live your life as a Hindu. You don't really live your life as a citizen of India, right? You live your life as a Hindu. And the religion supposedly fitting that image, not surprisingly, are Hinduism. Catholicism, although it's not a major force in India, also fits that preferred image. And in other countries similar to India, Catholicism plays that role instead of India. The idea, again, is religion supplies a complete culture. Everything you need to know about living your life is supplied by information from that religion that you're raised in. That's a very strong and powerful understanding of religion. Social fraternity is not really emphasized. Your main identity and allegiance is to your cultural heritage and your cultural group, not some sort of bond among all Indian citizens. Government promotes strong multiculturalism. It allows various provinces, states, it allows religious organizations to have a great deal of social power and control. And that fits with its preferred image of religion. In India, it is widely believed that religion, specifically Hinduism, is good at keeping people in their own separate social order or caste, and that's useful for maintaining social order. Religion is viewed as a powerful cultural force for good that the government could neither replace nor do without. So government had better be in tight alliance with religion in order to keep the country together. And this indeed has been a mantra of Indian politics since its liberation from the British Empire. Personal liberty really isn't a priority. Government tends to reinforce the feeling that people ought to belong in one in-group. For example, caste. Now we might say, hasn't India gotten beyond caste? Oh no, far from it. The Constitution of India, in fact, in various sorts of ways reinforces caste. Okay? Because, for example, there is quota systems that make sure that certain percentages of all of the castes have representation in government. We don't do that too much in America, hardly at all, right? We don't have a strict quota system like that. There's other ways of rigging our system, but we don't use that one. But this fits with the preferred image of religion. People don't need or want a lot of liberty. Religion only provides as much personal liberty as people need, and religion knows how much the people need it, right? Because religion's in charge of culture here. Again, Hinduism with its notion of karma, only a modest amount of personal freedom is involved there. With Catholicism, it's the notion of the original sin. You don't want a lot of freedom. Trust me, that's the path to sinning. Okay, so India, its constitution, the way they do politics, the way politics interacts with religion looks very alien to our eyes. So much entanglement, so much government involvement in religion, so much government actively promoting and supporting religious institutions and religious culture. Seems weird to our eyes. How could that be a version of political secularism? But nevertheless, it is. It is in that broad family. The United States should look familiar, but now watch for the contrasts. We have a very different preferred image of religion. It's not Hinduism, of course, with no heritage. It's not Catholicism. Catholicism has played a limited role in the American conscience. It's, of course, Protestantism. Government does not obey or help religious institutions, but of course it permits private practice, and this notion that religion ought to be a private matter is a powerful idea that was not invented by atheists, it was invented by Protestants, of course. It's their religious heritage, it's their hard lessons learned after so many religious wars. The preferred image of religion is that religion, nothing here about supplying a complete culture for people. This is all about supplying something that people personally, privately need over and above their doings in ordinary life. It's about private conscience. So believers want maximum liberty to that respect. They want as much liberty as they can to privately practice their religion. Again, Protestantism fits that image. Social fraternity is not a big priority to promote. It at most sort of promotes a mild patriotism. Government doesn't have to do much work to promote social fraternity because Protestantism has been given that role. The preferred image of religion is that religion promotes some core virtues useful for social cohesion and order. Now, atheists may dispute this, but we're talking about what America generally has believed for the last 300 years. And in fact, you can find all of the founding fathers more or less saying exactly that. Religion is good for this country because not because it's right about Jesus or it's correct about God or because it's got the right scripture. The founding fathers disagreed about that, varying from quite liberal Protestantism all the way through deism to close outright atheism at points. But they did agree that religion promotes some core virtues useful for maintaining social cohesion and order. What religion fits that preferred image? It's Protestantism, right? That's the heritage of this country. In this country, government at most supports a sort of mild multiculturalism. It hasn't promoted strong multiculturalism yet. I emphasize the yet, because that's going to be the topic of the final part of my talk, which is coming up real quick. But this fits the preferred image of religion because, on America's view, religion just tends to diversify into many odd but tolerant denominations anyway. There's only one religion, actually, around the world that fits that mold. Yep, it's Protestantism. Okay, you see, right? We have our preferred image of religion. We construct a government that we think deals best with that preferred form. But these things can change. One last example, let's run through France. France is more and more recently moving towards actively discouraging public expression and promotion of religion. But that's because they have a very different preferred image of what religion is all about. They have a very negative view, generally, in France. They've had it for a long time. Although Catholicism is traditionally, quote, the religion of France, secular government's entanglements and clashes with Catholicism has produced this sort of political lineup. The preferred image of religion is that religion is about totalitarian control over public and private life. That's a very negative view. But they have a couple of religions in mind when they talk that way, theocratic Islam and Catholicism. Not just any Catholicism, but, you know, good old-fashioned French Catholicism, which took orders from the Vatican. Personal liberty, not so much. If we take ours as sort of the null, being, parochial, we do it the right way. France doesn't emphasize personal liberty quite as much. Government inhibits religious expression and promotion to a slight degree now. There are signs that France may be interested in doing more of it. A woman was recently arrested in France for wearing, the veil, the hijab. The preferred image of religion, again, is, well, religion is a much worse suppressor of personal liberty. In other words, government justifies it by saying, well, what, you want them? No, right? Islam under Sharia law, is that what you want? No, you're better protected by the French government. In France, government aids assimilation. It tries to make society homogenous in all sorts of ways. Language, the cheeses. But again, the preferred image of religion tends to support such strong government action in the cultural sphere, which we regard as kind of weird in the United States, because, of course, in France, the reply is, well, religion demands far greater in-group conformity and strict obedience. You don't want that. And the religion supposedly fitting that image right now is, of course, Islam, or its code word, alien values. In Europe, that's a code, and everybody knows what it means. It means Islam, right? All right. We've run through 3 political secularisms. Each one has its preferred image of what religion really is all about, and not surprisingly, that preferred image has a great deal to do, not with reality, but with the past, what each country has individually gone through as a nation in its struggles towards secular government. They each have an image of how religion works. Now here's the contrast. In India, religion's wise culture supplies one's identity and larger purpose for living the good life. You don't want to mess with that. You want to help that, and the government does. Government partners with all religions equally, at least in theory. Of course, Muslims aren't happy. They never quite get equality with the Hindus, but it is an aim. It tends to mirror society's diversity rather than be completely neutral. What is the secularist remedy when religious trouble flares? Well, given the setup, the secularist remedy is to say, well, we need to help religions exercise semi-autonomous control over their different groups. India has been doing this. In other words, that'll quell things. Government is on the side of religion, so the religions shouldn't be fighting with each other. A crude formula, hardly realizable very easily in practice, but nevertheless, that's the mantra that they tell themselves. This sort of India equality secularism, this strong promotion of multiculturalism, of course, is going on elsewhere in the world. Most notably, it's been going on in the United Kingdom to an increasing degree. Canada is starting to experiment with it. Okay? And this is on the minds of religious people around the world. The United States should look familiar. Religion's non-rational faith is about private conscience and personal morality. Therefore, the government can simply neutrally enforce law and policy, leaving morality up to the people. What is the secularist remedy for flare-ups of religious trouble? Well, that should sound familiar, right? That's our recipe here at home. Advocate reason, science, rights, fundamental rights. Enforce separation of church and state. That'll make everybody go back to their corners. Of course, there's only one religion that fits that preferred image. It's Protestantism. And it only, and somewhat variably, works with Protestantism. In France, the preferred image is that religious tyranny forces itself on people's minds, morality, social habits. Therefore, the people need a strong government on their side to protect themselves from religious tyranny. And citizens have to abandon allegiance to alien culture. That means they have to abandon their identity as Muslim, for example, and fully identify as French citizens. One example of that is how France more and more is putting pressure on leaders of Islamic communities to turn over malcontents and inform the police of things going on in their mosques. Something that really can't happen in the United States. It can be demanded, but right now, precedent in law says that a religious leader cannot be compelled to go to the police or punished for not going to the police about things heard in private inside the confines of their church. That may change, but for right now, that is the law. France has a stronger view of things. Now, this is the final screen, and this is sort of a conversation that's now going on between secularism and religion. But let me throw something out there. Right now in the Supreme Court, how many Catholics are there? There's 6 Catholics. And how many Protestants are on the Supreme Court? 0. John Paul Stevens retired in last year. There are 3 people of Jewish heritage on the Supreme Court. This would have been inconceivable 2 generations ago and politically impossible a generation ago. Something profound is changing in America, and we have to pay attention to it. Because those earlier screens where I was talking about the United States, its preferred image of religion, Protestantism and stuff, that's becoming outdated. Religion is using a new strategy in America now. The old strategy was maintain secularism because you could count on Protestants not getting along with Catholics. not getting along with Jews, not getting along, right? So Protestants were willing to go along with a great deal of secular neutral government because they didn't want the Catholics getting any privileges. So the Protestants were willing to scale back what they wanted from government, how much control they wanted over things like education, because they knew if they got it, the Catholics would get it too. They didn't want the Catholics to get it, so they said, all right, nobody gets it. And that was the compromise from the Civil War until just past World War II. That compromise is over. They have reached a new compromise, and you can tell that they have because there are how many Catholics on the Supreme Court? Something different is happening. And what's happening is a new multiculturalism détente. In the academic world, this theory is being bandied about. I think it has some substance to it. This is a fact that requires explaining. There's a new strategy on the part of religions in America, and our old secular strategy that used to work against Protestantism isn't going to be working much longer. In fact, there are already signs it's not working now. Take, for example, the issue of abortion. Abortion has been the single greatest point of alliance between Protestants and Catholics, right? Protestants and Catholics no longer regard each other as the primary enemy in culture in America. They regard now secularism as the primary enemy. And they are willing to ally, toss out their own differences, and combine forces, saying, look, what we need here is a multiculturalist approach. It's been working in other countries. On the multiculturalist approach, all of the religions go to the government and say, we all want XYZ. What do they all want? They want abortion. They want to be able to discriminate against homosexuals. They want more control over religious education in the schools. And they're trying to get it, and now they have a Supreme Court that's very close to letting them have it. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence, okay? Mississippi, and I believe another state, which doesn't occur to me right now, on the ballot next fall is going to be voting to change the state constitution that makes personhood and hence citizenship begin at the moment of conception. It will pass. It'll pass in Mississippi. I'm told by Mississippians it'll pass. Now, whether it'll pass court muster depends on what the Supreme Court is like in 2013 or 2014. Okay? Right? There's a lot at stake here. It is possible that this Protestant-Catholic alliance will simply say, our old disputes are over. What we need to do is make sure at least religion is in control of culture, even if we can't make our own preferred denomination in control. The old worry used to be theocracy, right? One denomination getting control of government and perverting it according to its own specific religious laws. That actually is no longer the main threat in America. There's degrees of trouble here. It's not just theocracy or secular government. There's a range. And I've been trying to introduce to you the idea that other cultures have had ranges of entanglement between religion and government. Their strategy looks something like this. What we can do is reassert religious control over government, not by forcing government to say, Protestantism is right or Catholicism is right, but just to get some agreement on some core religious agendas, ethical and educational. Bend it to our will so we can survive in this country. And they're fair on their way to achieving it. There are 6 Catholics on the Supreme Court. Inconceivable 30 years ago. The Protestants would have never allowed it. There's obviously a new game in town. We're not ready for it. Those old secular strategies, we're not ready for it. Advocating reason, science, separation of church and state, outdated. We're confronting a new kind of thing that other countries are dealing with, but we haven't dealt with it in this country. India has been dealing with it, Turkey to a certain extent, the United Kingdom, Canada is starting to. The multiculturalism agenda is to get government to actively help religion in general on a few core ethical and educational issues, to give a great deal of freedom to different cultural communities, read religions, to have greater local control over their populations. It's a strategy of divide and conquer. Protestants get what they want, more Protestant charter schools. Catholics get what they want, more Catholic charter schools, et cetera, right? If they can do this, they will exercise a great deal of religious control over this country, and of course, we know they won't stop there. But that is their, dare I say, wedge program, right? It's their intelligently designed political program. Okay? They're going to manage to go do an end run around separation of church and state because the Supreme Court is just 9 people, and all you need is 5 votes. Separation of church and state depends on the personal opinions of 5 people in this country. That's all you need. That's all you need. And the religious alliance between Protestants and Catholics knows this. They've already got a big piece of the puzzle. Now they just need the various states to send them cases. Oh, but they're already doing that. Okay? What must be the secularist response? We have got to be ready for this dialogue. This dialogue is already happening. Secularism has been saying, look, religion is just a free choice of irrational faith. Isn't that what we tell each other? That's the atheist thing that we tell each other. That's what religion is all about. Religious people have another idea about what their religion is about. The old Protestant model is being abandoned. Protestants are abandoning an agreement with that. They instead reply that faith is reasonable and it's practical for living a meaningful and moral life. Now that should sound familiar because that's a humanist criteria. This Protestant Catholic alliance is being made possible and being sold to the public using humanist ideas. They're trying to out-humanist us. They're saying religion is better for this mortal life than any combination of secularism, materialism, and capitalism. That's what they're saying. And religious people are eating it up. Now, this is a much more robust view of religion than old-fashioned Protestantism, right? This is now about religion becoming a complete culture. Secularism, we say religion should lose even more social control, but religion says, no, people live best in a rich religious culture, not a thin and empty materialist culture. We want secular institutions to lead? No. On the strong multiculturalism model, the religions are going to be providing the cultural leadership. Finally, citizenship? No. You go down this road, and religious believers will be looking to their own religious communities and religious leaders. Southern Baptists, right, they found that model early on, right? All of a sudden, the Pat Robertsons and Jerry Falwells are blessing kings. Well, not quite kings. Presidents. They're kingmakers, yes, good phrase. What we have to do is we need a new strategy. My very humble mission is just to frighten the daylights out of you, to inform you that we're in this kind of conversation, but if we think we can stop at number 1 or number 2, we are sorely mistaken. They're moving on to 3 or 4. And they have a multiculturalism agenda where they want the government to actively promote religion in general and give a great deal of authority and control over to the separate religions for maintaining social order and culture. There are fair ways already towards getting it, and we have to realize that this is the new political realities that we face. Thank you very much.